they put so much emphasis on I need a bigger number that they don't care how they get that number. So they start to cheat, change body position, shorten the range of motion, and so on and so forth. That's not progressive overload.
Looking at training to get into those things there, one thing I thought would be fun to be able to do is there's a lot of different training methods, so if you're going through, let's say super training is a great example because they kind of break everything out. Here's the maximal methods, here's hypertrophy methods, here's power methods, peak and power kind of being the same thing, and then conditioning methods. And then with each one of those things, especially when you get, let's go with strength because that's fun first. So we'll go with the strength first because that's the fun. It's the hypertrophy.
But hypertrophy is like, it's so simple.
It kind of is, but it will be fun to talk about. It's simple, but it's got the most methods.
Yeah.
Like when you start looking at strips, that's pretty exciting.
But when you look at the methods, though, they work all by the same mechanism.
Yes. That's the crazy thing.
Like a drop set, a strip set, a rest pause. It's simply, it does the same thing with a different mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, fuck it. We're already in it. So let's just go with it. So we're in the hypertrophy with the methods to where I agree with what you're saying. They all work by different means, and it's funny because you've been around long enough, actually for a long time. So you've seen the same things called many different things. Yeah. So rest pause, cluster sets, myo reps. Yep. God, I can probably, if we think long enough, there's probably 12 other ones, and we can make up our own if you just want to.
And that's the thing, right? You can just myo reps. It's a variation of rest pause when you think about it. And when you look at, for example, fortitude training, like muscle rounds, it's the same thing as myo reps. Really,
it's all there. So it's extended sets after.
Yeah.
Where the caveat I think a lot of people miss here is when you're talking about failure, and you have to define that, which we've already talked about a little bit, becomes hard to do. And then secondly, you have to define the means to which you're going to get there. Yep. Now you're talking about tempo, which is a method that falls into the hypertrophy, but it's still a method per se, because if I use, a 3-second eccentric in a 1-second loaded stretch position, no momentum to start, and then the concentric, that's completely different than just doing a rep.
Yeah, you build more fatigue per rep, for one thing. But there's also different physiological mechanism at play. Yeah. Especially with the loaded stretch.
Well, I think the point with that for now, because we'll get back to the loaded stretch, is if somebody's physically putting an exercise in the program, and then the way that they're using their progressive overload is simply changing the means by which the rep is done. Yep. That is a means.
Absolutely.
It's definitely a means. Yep. But sometimes I think that what they think they're doing, they're not really doing, and they're not achieving the benefits from what they're doing for the reasons they think they're doing it. That makes sense. Where if I put something in being older, right, I'm more joint friendly. Yep. So the tempo is way controlled. It's much more controlled. There's no momentum. There's all these other things for most things, not all things, but most things. I can easily come in the next week and just say, okay, regular tempo. And if I have a logbook, I'm fucking killing it. Yeah. But if I stick to the same method that I'm doing that set for, then maybe I can squeak 3 weeks out of it, or three sessions, 3 times. And then I can then switch to either a different method with the same exercise or a different exercise. What I think people get, and this is in my opinion, where a lot of hypertrophy people get fucked up with the hypertrophy training, is they're not keeping to whatever method that they're using. Yep. And so thus they get in this brain fog of beating a logbook, which may not be beating the logbook on how you started 4 weeks ago, and making them blinded to the same things are happening with each type of set that you're doing.
Yeah, if you're using progressive overload, it's only progressive overload if the added weight was accomplished, or the added reps was accomplished in the exact same conditions.
Yes, that's the point I'm trying to make, which you just made very more concise.
I did but that's the one benefit of Instagram. Yeah, you learn to get the point across in 30 seconds. But yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that was the main. Again, okay. People, I love DC training. That type of training appeals to me. Okay, and when I say DC training, it could be like different methods, but it's low volume, high effort. That's how I like to train most of the time. Okay, I will cycle in phases of higher volume, but that's my go-to training. Like that one hard work set, I ramp up to it, but not always rest pause. But that you get the point.
No, I get it.
And I think that everybody who applies that system properly will gain muscle. Okay. The problem is that most people aren't, because they are focused on one thing, and it's beating the logbook. And yes, that's the core of progressive overload. But again, they put so much emphasis on I need a bigger number that they don't care how they get that number. So they start to cheat, change body position, shorten the range of motion, and so on and so forth. That's not progressive overload. You're just using a different, and who knows, maybe you're actually getting weaker, you just don't know
it. More likely they probably are. Where if they were to hit an additional session doing exactly how they did the first time, they may not be as good as what they were the first time.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with training method. So if you go from this method to this one, you don't know for sure if the method was more demanding. Now, I do like to use progression by methods. I call that the fixed weight progression model or something like. If someone just can't add weight that much anymore, you can get a better stimulus by gradually increasing how hard that one work set is. But it has to be clear that it's harder. So meaning that for me, the tempo needs to be the same. The condition in which you do the reps are the same, but you can add something more after failure. So for example, maybe the first time you do the method, you go to failure, right? But the progression would be to go from going to failure plus doing a drop set. Then the progression to that would be going to failure and doing a rest pause, which is, again, it accomplishes the same thing as a drop set. But rather than using volume, you're using just more reps with the same load. So the average load is higher. Then you can go from rest pause to, let's say, going to failure, rest pause, then doing assisted reps. You can do failure, rest pause, assisted reps, then negatives. There are ways of making your methods harder, and it's pretty easy to come up with. But that, to me, is a form of progressive overload, not by weight, but making each week or 3-week cycle more demanding. I like to stick for a method for 3 weeks because you need to give it time for the body to adapt. I think even when I personally do a form of conjugate training, and that's something when I was doing Jason Brown's program, I was writing his program for a while, and I did use conjugate with him, but in 3-week cycles. So it would stick to the same max effort lift for 3 weeks. And then we would rotate in. I also did that with a sprint cyclist, like the track cyclist, with the huge legs. I would change the squat variation every 3 weeks, not every week. So, but I believe that it gives time for the movement to do its work.
Well, I also think that for a lot of people, they need a time just to get reacclimated to that lift. How I do now, if I'm changing out what my heavy lift is, I need 1 week just to get fucking reacclimated to what is this.
And it probably, you need that more now than you did when you were younger.
Oh, but yeah, I do, which is kind of fucked up. But anyhow, I do, because younger, I was changing it all the time. But now, and I'm still in a 1 to 3 rep range, but it's not maximal. It's maximal enough that I need to remember what to do here. Where am I in space? What am I supposed to flex? What's supposed to be tight? And then kind of rotate through. Then that gives me that second week, that maybe a striking week may not be. Then the third usually is, then by that it's, off to whatever the next one is. Where I see that unless somebody is, and this is rare, extremely proficient and has the chemistry that you're talking about to be able to rotate exercises every single week. And that means proficient in conjugate, proficient in the exercises, have the ability to be able to do that. And now all of a sudden you're dealing with a rare group.
That's a natural, like the guys who just like pick up a sport and they just get it instinctively.
Or they've thrown in the environment and they've been doing it for 7 years or 6 years and they just.
Well, it's like, when I look at, for example, I'm going to use the analogy of a CrossFit athlete, because I think they're good examples for that specific thing. The best CrossFit athletes are those who do not need to practice every single movement they're going to be competing in year round. And that's a big advantage over those who need to practice them, because there are so many different movements in CrossFit, right? If you need to train them to some extent every month, there's just no way to program all that volume. So if, for example, once you're able to do a snatch, you will never lose that. And you don't have to train it for like 6 months. You can focus on something else. That's a huge advantage. Like Matt Fraser was, I don't know how many times CrossFit champion. He was a former national level weightlifter. So at his peak, he did not snatch heavy for a whole year. He was still able to snatch 315.